I know we haven't actually created any content ourselves yet, but we want to be familiar with the tools we have so as we do get started, we know how to work in the best way possible. One of the important features that Word offers that's often overlooked is the ability to change views. Views provide alternate ways in which we can see our document content and work with it in the most efficient way. There are 5 views, and we have quick access to all of them all the way on the bottom right in this little view bar at the very bottom right side of our status bar. The 5 views include print layout, full screen reading layout, web layout, outline, and draft. We of course opened up in the default view, which is the print layout view. What you may notice is that print layout is the default, and it shows us as closely as possible how the actual printed document will look. It includes things like the edges of the page, and as I scroll down using the wheel on my mouse, we can see the edges of the page, and when we get to a page break, we actually can see the physical difference between page 1 and page 2. There's also a little trick I want to show you here that has to do with hiding the margins. We haven't talked a lot about margins yet, but we do know that there are margins usually at the top and bottom of the page. If I move to one of the edges of my pages, I actually get a double-headed arrow, and I can double-click to hide the white space. I just want you to watch what happens. I'll double-click once, and the margins basically go away, and then I can move there again and double-click, and it brings them back. This is intended to save us some space. Personally, I don't like it because the reason I use this view is I want to see it just like it's going to look on the page. And when I take those margins away, it looks like everything's sitting at either the very top or the very bottom. So that's just personal preference. The reason I actually wanted to show it to you is sometimes we accidentally double click when we have this little cursor with our mouse and we hide it and we don't know what we did. So now you know. And if you want to fix it, you can simply double click to bring it back. Now getting back to the general print layout view, what we know here is that all of our content shows up in kind of a WYSIWYG, or what you see is what you get format. We get to see text, formatting, graphics, columns, tables, headers, footers, page breaks, the whole thing. We can easily zoom in and out using the zoom tool on the bottom right so we can see detailed content, or we can zoom all the way out and see multiple pages. This is the view that I think most of us will work in most of the time. All right, so that's kind of what we'd probably expect. So the question is, what do these other views offer us? Well, let's go ahead and move down, click on our second button, which is our full screen reading view. Now you notice a lot of things happen real quick, so I'll give you just a second to kind of take in what's here. While you do that, I'll remind you that we've been moving in the direction of a paperless lifestyle for years now. We certainly haven't gotten there yet, but we do find that we're finally reading more and more documents on screen rather than always printing hard copies. In order to better accommodate this, Microsoft added a reading layout view a couple of versions ago. This view takes away a lot of the normal interface elements, simplifying our view and giving us more room to read. This is especially important if we use a laptop or other portable device where we might have a smaller screen than our regular desktop. It also mimics a book with 2 pages side by side. That's kind of more comfortable for many users as they're reading. What we will notice is that, for the most part, the layout doesn't matter anymore. All of the text and everything's going to be resized on the pages so that it fits the way we want to see it to read, not necessarily for the printed page. Also, we can see some examples over here on the right-hand side where our graphics aren't really laying out the correct way anymore either. So we may have some issues with things like word art, wide graphics, tables, and columns. But generally speaking, that's okay. In addition, our page numbers and footers and our table of contents are going to be removed because they're not relevant in this view. Pages really become irrelevant. So if we look at the top left of the screen, we have some different tools. We can certainly save the document. We also can go to a regular print preview. There's a drop down with some tools that we can use to bring up the research task pane or to highlight stuff. And then of course we have access to some of those tools over here on the right, including being able to highlight or to add notes. Most importantly, in the middle, it tells us that we no longer have pages. I don't remember exactly what it was. I think this was a 26-page document, but currently we're looking at screens, not pages, and with the size that we have, we are on screen 44. We can use these little arrows to move back and forth, just like you would through a book. We also could go to the bottom outside edges of each page and kind of flip them like we would a regular novel, if you will. And on the right-hand side, we again have some more options, including options for the view. First of all, when I get my eyes really tired, I've been staring at the screen for at least 29 hours in any given day, I can increase the text size. Now as I give this a click, you'll see that the text size does actually increase. This is going to make it easier for me to read, possibly without glasses. You'll also notice that our screens increase. Remember, we're not manipulating the actual document here. We're only working in this view, so don't worry about making it a lot larger or changing the page numbers. The actual document is going to be just fine. So we can scroll through this document and read it the way that we would expect to read it. And when we're all finished, we're going to click the Close button on the right-hand side. That's going to bring us back to whatever view we left, which in our case is our print layout view. One more little note about that reading view, because it's not as obvious as the interface differences, is that this view is actually better for us physically. Now you saw me increase the size of the font, and that's good. But if you spend a lot of time reading things on screen each day like I do, you might notice that sometimes you get fatigued or your eyes get tired, even maybe headaches from eye strain. The reading view actually uses ClearType technology. In short, it basically means it produces much clearer type. Although we probably don't notice the difference ourselves, our eyes do. It's sharper and it's clearer, so it reduces eye strain. Some studies actually have shown that it can increase our reading speed by 10 to 15% as well. So the difference is going to depend on your operating system, your monitor, your resolution, and more. But that's one of the advantages that people often don't realize when they're deciding whether to use this view or not. A lot of people will say, I can just scroll through my document in the normal view, right? Well, yes, you can. But if you're really doing a lot of reading, that full screen reading view is going to be better for you. Enough of a lecture about that. Now let's go ahead and move on to our third view. That means we need to move down to the bottom of the screen again. Click on our third button, and this is actually the one that has to do with the web, called Web Layout View. Now you'll notice that the edges of our pages go away. That's because this is designed to show us how our document will look in a web browser or if we convert it to HTML. While we call web pages pages, they actually don't have the same attributes as pages in Word. For many of us, a printed page in Word is an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. But a web page width is determined by our monitor and our resolution, and the length is limitless. It can be 1 screen or 100 screens long. The web layout view allows us to see the Word document as it would appear in a browser. So we have this solid page. As we begin to scroll down, you will notice that, even though we didn't look at our other document in a lot of depth, there are no pages here. I can scroll and scroll and scroll and scroll, and it's just one long continuous page. That's part of this feature. The other thing I want to show you is by reducing our window size. I'm just going to put it into the restored size here because I wanted to show you that what we're seeing if I resize the window in this particular view is that the text doesn't get cut off, it just kind of repaginates itself. That again is another feature of web pages, not of a Word document. I'll go ahead and maximize that again to get us back where we can see things a little bit easier. A few of the other differences include that we'll have backgrounds, they'll be visible if they're used, and our graphic positions will actually appear like they will on a web page, which might be a little bit different than they did actually in Word. So you'll want to go ahead and use this view if you're planning on publishing your document out to a web server or to a web page so that people can view it via a browser. The differences might be small, but in other ways they can also be significant. There are really a lot of features that appear differently, or may not even appear at all because HTML doesn't support them or renders them differently. We're not going to go into all of those because those are topics for an HTML or web design class, but just know that this view is useful to see what will happen to your Word document when saved as a web page and viewed in a browser without having to know all of that background. All you have to know is what you'll learn in this series about using Word itself. Next on our list and next on our toolbar is using something called the outline view. We'll go ahead and give that one a click. We'll be working with the outline view specifically in our chapter on long documents. As a quick introduction though, let's go ahead and take a look at what we see here. This definitely looks different than what we've been seeing before. We'll need to know a few things about using Word before we actually learn how to use this, and that's again why we're going to cover it more in later chapters. Primarily what we need to know is that this is only about text. We're not going to worry about any kind of graphical content. We can, however, see some of our tools here and how the document is organized. I'm going to go all the way back up to the top, and I just want you to kind of watch the little indicators that you see. These don't look like typical paragraphs and sentences, although there certainly are paragraphs and sentences. But as we get up near the top, we can see that we have some little indicators. For example, strategy for organizational success. That has a big plus sign next to it. If we pause over it, we get a 4-headed arrow. If I double click on it, I can expand and I can collapse this particular section. Likewise, I can do the same with things like executive summary, business concept, management structure, and I'm just double-clicking the plus sign. The outline primarily allows us to expand and collapse based on the use of headings so that we can see very high-level or very detailed information from the document. Not only can we view documents in this way, we also can rearrange content very easily. For example, I could move the executive summary to the middle of the document, whether that executive summary was one sentence, one page, or 100 pages long, by simply dragging the heading. As I said, we're going to explore this view more later on, but hopefully you can see how this view is helpful when we need to work with the content of complex or long documents without worrying about the actual layout on the pages themselves. Last but not least, let's take a look at our draft view. That's the very last one in our view bar. We'll give that a click, and again we'll kind of scroll down to see what we can see. What we can see is that we're not seeing that graphic. Actually, it was a text box that was on the first page, and we're not seeing the actual physical divisions between pages, but just a section break that says next page. As we continue to scroll down, again, another section break here. And as we start to get through the content of the document, if you look very closely, at certain places you may see a little dashed or dotted line. This dashed or dotted line represents our page breaks, but we don't actually get to see the physical breaks between pages. This is what I like to call the simplified view. In older versions of Word, it was called the normal view. Like the outline view, the draft view does not show a lot of formatting or content, although it does give us a little bit of formatting. Graphics, columns, headers, and footers, those kinds of things will not show up here. As I said, it's a simplified view, and it's useful for just working with the written content and perhaps some few page and section breaks, but really not again with the layout as a whole. So there you've had a quick little preview of the 5 views that we have. Just wanted to mention that we do have a View tab at the top of the screen. All of these document views are available here, just like they were from the view bar. It does take a couple extra clicks to get here, so my guess is you'll probably use the view bar more often than the View tab. There are some other things, though, that we have access to here that we don't from other places. For example, this is where we can turn our rulers on or off. If your ribbon collapses down, we'll go ahead and go back to the View tab and click on Ruler to bring those back up. We also can turn the rulers on or off, again without having to go to this tab, by going to the top of the vertical scroll bar. There's a little button just above the up arrow that allows us to turn the rulers on and off as well. Let's get back to View, and this time let's do grid lines. Grid lines is useful if you're putting things on your page, as in page layout, but it's probably not something we would want to keep on all the time. Now I'm going to do something here that we need to do so we don't keep getting this little ribbon popping up and down. I'm simply going to use the down arrow on the far right hand side of the screen to expand it. That way it won't try to collapse and get out of the way. Now we can turn rulers or grid lines on or off. I'm going to leave the ruler on, turn the grid lines off, and we'll talk about the navigation pane in its own lesson later on. Lastly, we do have zoom tools. You can use different types of zoom levels here, but remember we also have the zoom tool on the bottom right side of our screen. We can click the plus and minus signs to zoom in and out 10% at a time. We can drag the slider left and right to zoom in or out to a certain level. And we also can click on the actual percentage to bring up some of these predefined ones as well. I'll go ahead and cancel out of that and just remind you that even though the View tab does give us some good tools like rulers and grid lines, generally all of this stuff is more readily available right from the interface itself. So we're probably not going to come into the View tab very often just to access these tools. The other options that we see here we'll be covering a little bit later on. Okay, while views and view settings aren't directly related to getting content into our documents, they certainly are an important option to be aware of. Rulers and grid lines will become important for non-text type of content, including things like setting tabs. You'll decide which one of the 5 views you prefer for the particular task at hand as you work. Sometimes we use one more than another one. If you don't like the one I'm working in, that's okay, but there's probably a reason I'm there. Generally speaking, I work with the print layout view because it does give us that WYSIWYG format, so it's easy to see exactly how the things we're doing are going to affect the final document. There's no right or wrong, just differences, and we need to know which one to use to work most efficiently.